trying to think of how long it was ago. I'm going to say maybe 8-10 years ago. All of a sudden, I really took to the Shema. It's one of the things that the very first thing I do when I wake up, before I even get out of bed, I repeat this passage. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. Love the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, and your neighbor as yourself. One of the reasons that I have made this a part of my daily discipline is the words that follow the Shema stress how important it is. Teach it to your children. When you're at home, when you're away, bind it on you, put it on your doorpost. Know this, live it, recite it, memorize it. Observant Jews recited this combination of confession and prayer to God twice a day during their morning prayers and evening prayers. It was familiar and important. It was almost like a key, as Bruce said, a key to their faith in their relationship with God. As I tried to think, the best equivalent, and maybe you can come up with something better than I could, but in the moment, the best thing I could think about was for Christians, we all know the Lord's Prayer. It doesn't matter if you're a Methodist or if you're Catholic or if you're Episcopalian. We as Christians have the Lord's Prayer. Our scene depicted in today's gospel reading opens much as had the previous two questions and answers that we find earlier, starting in Mark 11 and then going through this chapter 12 of Mark, where Jesus is having these discussions with the religious leaders, the scribes. Here, a scribe approaches Jesus, and his intellectual curiosity was tweaked by the learned discussions that he had overheard. Indeed, what warrants this scribe's attention is, listen to this, is not Jesus' position on the question, but the fact that it says that Jesus answered well. He, the scribe who was steeped in the Torah, understood that this passage from Deuteronomy, and the second part of that passage comes from Leviticus. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord, that passage says. These two things are paramount in serving God. They sum up the entirety of the Torah, the law God has revealed to Moses, recorded in the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scripture, also known as the Pentateuch. Now, just a word about Torah, so that we are clear about the understanding and importance and significance of the conversation between Jesus and this scribe. One commentator writes, to translate the Hebrew word Torah as simply law is misleading. Because in the English language, we tend to think of law mainly in a restrictive function. Our laws are generally agreed upon a list of do's and do nots, and not much more than that. Do's and do not. Do not go over the speed limit. Do's and do nots. The meaning of Torah is far richer. Rabbinical students are encouraged not to just memorize the law, but to meditate on it, to internalize it. Psalm 1 promises that those who do this will be like trees planted by the rivers of water. In the Jewish understanding, Jesus' law nourishes the soul. God's life is law, and law is life. Studying Torah, the lifelong preoccupation of the scribe who questions Jesus, is really about learning God's way of doing things. So not the do's and the don'ts, but what God wants us to do, how God acts in creation. This is why the scribe so readily agrees with Jesus' answer to his question when he says that love is the key. Let me say that again, because if I was at Montreat, okay, Kylie, I'd love that at Montreat. When I always go to Montreat, I pick up something. I would tell the kids, get out your phones, which they all have, and they would write down. The most important part about the law is talking about love. It's not do's and it's don'ts. It's about love. It's about love of God and love of neighbor. You see, they got all caught up in about sacrifices and the way the food was to be prepared and the money they gave at the temple. It's not about how pious you are, how righteous one is. It's not about any of those things. It's about how we practice love. love for God and love for neighbor. It's about reflecting God's love. So I want you to think for a moment, how did you reflect God's love yesterday? How did someone else reflect God's love to you? Adeline, I still can't get over when you and Julia saw each other Wednesday at Joy Company. They screeched with delight and ran and embraced each other. That's reflecting God's love. Or when I was out to eat with Allison the other day, when the man jumped up to open the door for a couple that was having a hard time getting in, that's reflecting God's love. Rob Bell, who is, I don't know if you know Rob Bell, he's the one who wrote Love Wins. He has an interesting history. You need to go back and read it, because as soon as he wants to, well, this is my interpretation. So it seems like as soon as he wants to broaden the spectrum and bring everybody into God's love, then he kind of crossed some lines that some people didn't like. But this is what he writes about it. He says, if the gospel isn't good news for everybody, then it is not good news for anybody. And this is because the most powerful thing happens when the church surrenders its desires to convert people and to convince them to join. It's when the church gives itself away in radical acts of service and compassion, expecting nothing in return. That is the way that Jesus is most vividly put on display. Not when we want something, but when we are willing to give. To do this, the church must stop thinking about everybody primary in categories, oh, they're in or out, saved or not, believer or non-believer. Besides, the fact that these terms are so offensive to those who are the uns and the nons, they work against Jesus' teaching about how we are to treat each other. Jesus commanded us to love our neighbor. Our neighbor can be anybody. We are all created in the image of God, and we are all sacred, valuable creations of God. And then he ends this when he says, everyone matters. Everyone matters. We know this. This is not something new or controversial or way out. I'm not going on the limb to say that we would probably all sit here and nod our heads, yes, everyone is a child of God. But the question becomes, are we living that understanding? Are we living as if everyone is a child of God? Even those people that make us mad as heck, those people that we don't always agree with, those people who have different thoughts, those people who look different, who talk different, who live in a different place. As I was reading on this, one person commented, and I really kind of like this. Instead of defining what is love of God and neighbor, we do that a lot. We theologians want to describe and tell you everything about what you should know. You already know this. You know it deep in your heart. I don't have to tell you or describe it. But what they suggested, and I really liked, where is the love of God and neighbor present? So don't describe it, but where have you seen it? So I thought about that for a moment. Where is the love of God present? The love of God and neighbor is not simply a wonderful concept, but rather it's the present reality. It's what we're called to do and be. It is what makes the church the church. I just shake my head, and I have said lots of times, I am surprised people who are the uns or the nons who are kind of gone away. I get sometimes why they don't want to come to church. Because sometimes when we're out there in our everyday living, we're not inviting them to church. Not physically, but what we do and what we say and how we act and what's important to us. You see, where is the love of God and God and neighbor present? It's about tangible acts. It's about expressions of love. It's about kindness for the world to see. One commentator wrote it this, and I said this text serves as, and I love this, as a lantern that illuminates the presence of the love of God and neighbor in the congregation and beyond. Thank you, Adeline. So I came up with a list. And this is not exhaustive. If I kept you off this list, I didn't mean to. So I started thinking of a list, and I had to quit writing. We'll be here all day. So I came up with a list of people who serve God's kingdom within the church and beyond, more often than not going unnoticed, without expectation or rewards or accolades. They don't expect anything. It's just who they are and what they want to do. And so I want to thank some of these people. We've already thanked the tech people and the music people. You know, we thanked Jesse Cooper last week, and Peggy Collins, who was always there, and Mary Margaret and Cindy, George and Joyce and Beth. But how about Lynette? Do you know what Lynette does and feed? Or Gail Blackmore, do you know what she does constantly and all the time? Or how about the ladies that are on the prayer chain, who each and every day lift you up in prayer? How about the Royces and the Millers, who are foster parents to so many different kids who bring them in and do good homes? Or Joanne, who fosters dogs? I thought about Jackie Roy and Jackie Fontaine and Jenny Repolakis. I thought about Janet Harris and her cookies, and if you hadn't seen the cookies that she bakes and she gives to the youth every Sunday, you should see them this week. They're really cute. They got little Halloween things on it. And Kylie tells me that the kids love it. They know that somebody cares for them. It's just something little that reminds them that they are loved and thought about. I thought about Forrest and Michael, who are young and who have lots of things to do, but are willing to go back and help on a Sunday morning. I thought about Ken Junkins, who said, you know, I've got some free time now. I'll be glad to help. Or whenever we want some special music, who do we call on? Rebecca and Libby. Or our bell choirs, or our chancel choir, or our new connection choir, which Lynn is a part of, and Abby. I thought about all those who do Meals on Wheels. I know that we have right in here probably the Meals on Wheels Man of the Year, Person of the Year, Century, Jody. Jody does Meals on Wheels, has done it, and if anybody needs help, he goes right in. I know Carolyn has other people that are faithful, Paul and Claudia, and I don't even know who they all are, but I know that they do it every time. I think about those who remind us about social justice ministry, how important that is. Think about Paul Ryder, who's willing to take that over a little bit, and Ken. I think about Munsmay, who drove the women down so that they could go to the women's gathering. I think about Bob Keller, who's out there hours upon hours in our community out here on the grounds. Come here on a Saturday afternoon or late at night and watch all the people who use it, who have made it special, who make it welcoming for them. I could go on and on and on, and I know you have people you want to add and shout out right now who add to that. Which I think is really the question, and I hope that you'll take that with you today and through the week. Where is the love and God neighbor presented to you? Where have you seen it? Where have you stopped and seen God's face illumined? The scribe came up, and this is really interesting because usually we look at the scribes and we say, oh, they're trying to trick Jesus. They're trying to get him in this battle. This guy wasn't. He had heard him, he answered well, and this is a truly honest, authentic conversation. And Jesus gets it. And the guy got it. What's the greatest commandment? What is it? What is it? And without hesitation, Jesus says, love the Lord our God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And then he adds on that second part from Leviticus, and your neighbor as yourself. And when you do that, my friends, you have done everything you need to do.